I mentioned when we started today, we're going to have a guest joining us. He has joined us in the past on America Can We Talk. His name is Hans von Spakovsky. He is located in the Washington, D.C. area. He is with the Heritage Foundation. He is the head of their election law reform initiative. He's also a senior legal fellow. He's an expert on just an authority who is quoted on all sorts of news outlets around the country for regularly, an expert on issues involving civil rights, civil justice, the First Amendment, and immigration. And so I told him in my email today before we got started that I had more topics than time with him. So I want to race through and ask him a bunch of questions about many of the issues we're going to be talking about today, but especially I want to focus on with him FISA, the Department of Justice, Electoral College, Russians, and the Remain in Mexico policy. So I believe we have Hans von Spakovsky joining us. Hello, sir.
Hey, hi, Debbie. How are you doing?
I'm very well, and I'm glad to see you. Looking good. Glad to see you're out and about. Well, I want to jump in. You did a piece. I want to start with the story that was kind of making the rounds in the last couple of days. The smallest bit of background for our listeners was that you remember back when the Trump administration was being heavily investigated by the FBI, Department of Justice. We had the Mueller investigation. And as it rolled on, Robert Mueller announced indictments of some Russian entities. And these people, he alleged, were involved with trying to sway America's election in 2016. No connection between these Russians he indicted and the Trump team, but it got him headlines with the words Russia and Mueller in the same sentence. And so it made it look like he was doing something. In any case, news out today or yesterday was that it turns out that the DOJ is going to step back from those, asking to withdraw those charges against the Russians. So I know, Hans von Spakovsky, you followed this whole Mueller investigation at great length. So what are your thoughts about this? The DOJ dropping the Rosenstein and Mueller's nonsense case against the Russian companies?
Well, I think it shows the weakness of the Department of Justice's case. Look, the indictments were of specific Russian individuals who were basically trolling on social media, but they also indicted a company that they said was helping to finance it. The company, Concord, is the only company that actually showed up in an American courtroom to defend the case. And the Justice Department has just dismissed the case with prejudice, which means they can't bring it again. And I think that may show the weakness of the case. Look, the one thing I would tell you that has disturbed me about all of this is that this constant talk that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election. If you read the indictments that were filed by the Mueller team, and I did that, anybody who thinks that they were able to somehow successfully interfere with that election, that is just not the case. Most of the social media tweets and other things that these Russians put out had nothing to do with the election. It had to do with trying to get people upset over racial and other issues. And it's the same kind of disinformation campaign that the Soviets, when Russia was under the communists, engaged in during the entire Cold War. And the amount of money that was supposedly spent, even if you take everything to be true that was in the indictments, was a tiny fraction of the amount of money that the political parties and the candidates spent in the 2016 election. So anybody who thinks this had any effect on the election, I think is just not looking at reality.
I'm so glad you made both of those points, great points. On the disinformation idea, this is something, right, as you allude to, historically, this is what the Russians would do, and it wouldn't necessarily have been to support one candidate or the other, but just to kind of create civil unrest in our country. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's exactly right. And in fact, there was one of the indictments that talked about how they sent out tweets and encouraging supporters of Donald Trump to go to a protest in New York City. At the very same time, they were sending out tweets telling people to go to a protest supporting Hillary Clinton and protesting against Donald Trump. And that shows how they really were just trying to create civil unrest and not necessarily help one candidate or another.
Yeah, I'm so glad you made both those points. And also just, I don't know the exact money involved, but it was an amateur operation by the Russians. It wasn't a big, we're going to change everything. It's astonishing, though, that we're at this point now. We're now in 2020. We're headed toward the next presidential election. And only now is the DOJ looking at this going forward and saying, actually, as a matter of fact, we want to dismiss this complaint. So last thought on this, why do you think now the DOJ is moving to withdraw this complaint against these Russians?
Well, because they were going to very soon have to put up or shut up.
Yeah.
Trial was going to start in the very near future, and if they were going to dismiss the case, they were going to have to do it now before they actually got to trial, and then had to actually start producing whatever evidence the Mueller team thought it had to support the case.
So they're facing the whatever the rubber meets the road reality check. We have nothing to show here. Love it. Okay. So the next topic I want to hit with you, we've talked about this before, I think, in this, I don't know if you and I have talked about this in a show, but certainly with others, have the Remain in Mexico policy. And I want to, this is President Trump's initiative. I want to have you tell our listeners, this was a Trump initiative basically saying people showing up at the southern border who want to come into America and then make application for asylum, that they have to wait in Mexico. And so I want to start with, what is because you wrote a great piece about it at Heritage. And again, for our listeners, everything we're talking about, you can read these on my website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down a list of links. We have linked to what Hans wrote about this. But what was the legitimate reason for the Trump administration to put out the Remain in Mexico policy? What's the goal?
Well, it was to end the catch and release policy because, as you know, the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, only has a certain number of spaces where they can detain people. And once they reach that limit, any more illegal aliens coming across the border, all they would do is process them, give them a date to appear for an immigration hearing at some point in the future, and then release them. And what would these illegal aliens do? They would disappear into the vast interior of the country, and most of them would not show up for their immigration hearing. Why would they when they know they're not actually eligible to be in the U.S.? So the president actually took advantage of a federal statute. He was not acting on his own. There's a federal immigration statute that allows the executive branch to tell individuals who come across one of our land borders, who then claim asylum, to be returned back to the country they came from and remain there while their asylum claim is being looked at. This helped return 60,000 illegal aliens to Mexico last year. And this is a good thing because, in fact, statistics from the Department of Homeland Security show that 9 out of 10 asylum claims are fraudulent claims. They're not real claims. They're just claims made so the aliens can try to stay in the United States.
I completely believe that. We've actually been on this over on the show many times about what is the standard. You have to show the reasons provided in federal law that you can actually gain asylum, gain the legal status of being granted asylum. Is not just because you're poor, and domestic violence is not one of them. There are very specific reasons, and people coming here, they know a lot of them aren't going to meet us. They actually don't want to have that hearing because they're going to be told, sorry, you don't meet our law, our standard, right?
Yes. No, you're absolutely right about that. But this was a very important policy. And what had happened recently was that the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, as most people know, that's one of the most liberal appeals court in the country, also one of the most overturned appeals courts in the country. They had upheld an injunction that said that the Trump administration could not put this policy in effect, couldn't leave it in effect. Fortunately, about a week ago, the U.S. Supreme Court acted and stayed that injunction. So the policy currently is in effect.
So they stayed the injunction, meaning the policy is in effect, but the Supreme Court has not yet ruled on the substantive question of whether they're...
Yes.
Go ahead.
But in the meantime, it stays in effect, which is very, very important because that also acted as a disincentive for even more illegal aliens to cross the border. And it's very clear that it's had that effect.
You know what else, Hans? It's amazing how it segues to this current crisis involving the coronavirus. And I don't know if you saw these stories. I don't know if I sent them to you, but it's the most amazing thing. In Mexico, they have their president, and Andre Manuel Lopez Obrador. He has been out in public since everyone's aware of the coronavirus. Everyone understands it's being spread by handshakes. There are pictures. In fact, one picture I think is on our website of him greeting the people, and he's running down. It's like a path for him to run. Fans or supporters lined up on both sides, just like athletes will do, and he's doing high fives and hitting all of them, smacking hands with hundreds of Mexican citizens. And he said he wasn't going to stop hugging them and hand slapping with them because he didn't want them to be fearful. That was his reason given. He didn't want them to be fearful. So you now have the Remain in Mexico policy serving the additional purpose of keeping people out of our country, where you have the government itself not really going along with what we're trying to do in this country in order to keep Americans safe.
No, that's very true. That Mexico does not seem to be taking the steps that the United States and frankly other countries are taking to try to contain this virus. And as you know, again, showing how some liberal groups think, there's been a lawsuit filed to.
Well, sounds like we lost that connection. I'm sure Matt, the very wonderful, is going to try to get that again. I do want to hear what the lawsuit is, but in the meantime, to understand, folks, where we are with this coronavirus thing, in Mexico, here people are complaining in our country because we didn't do enough fast enough. We're going to get to that. But you have in Mexico, the president, he first was out saying, we hug in Mexico, hugging people, hand slapping, and then in some interim period, he said, well, okay, we'd be a little bit more careful. We should be more careful. And then he said just again yesterday, I'm not going to stop. He said, I am keeping up. His words, I must keep up people's spirits. So he's defending holding these large rallies during the coronavirus crisis. So here you have the president of Mexico not helping, which is interesting because this Remain in Mexico policy we were just talking about with Hans, whom I'm sure Matt is trying to get him again. You have the president of Mexico actually making Remain in Mexico a really wise policy, both with respect to protecting against the coronavirus, as well as, of course, making a more orderly process for our immigration folks here. So I guess Matt is trying. I'll tell you I'm going to tell you what I want to also ask Hans about, and then if we can't get him back, then I'll just tell you myself. But Hans has been talking in the media quite a bit about where we are in terms of the FISA court. This Department of Justice, you recall the FISA court was being used by the FBI, the DOJ, to get warrants to spy on the Trump campaign. This was going on at not just, an occasionally falsely a warrant obtained on false premises. There's 4 different FISA court warrants, all based on political hit job research paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, but then by the DNC, used as the basis to get these warrants. And then those warrants were the government officially using those warrants to spy on the Trump team. And now the question is, here we are in March of 2020, and we have some people arguing, can we just kind of let it go? Okay, it was a bad thing. We're done with that. And Hans has been very strong in saying we need to have the people who are either agents or lawyers, FBI, DOJ, whoever they are, who actually committed crimes, held accountable for those crimes. He's been very active in advocating this. I wanted to talk about that topic with him. So we're not getting him. No, we're not getting him. You know what? I don't know what's going on there. He's in Washington today, Hans is. We were talking earlier today, and Hans was at Heritage. He works for Heritage Foundation, was there part of the day, home part of the day, and I guess we've just lost the signal. So I'm going to finish out the last thing I want to tell you about him. He is a great expert. I'm very sorry to have lost in the middle of our interview, but he's been really strong in saying our side, the conservatives, need to stand up for and insist on trying to bring justice really to the American citizens, to the Trump team, to the Trump supporters, that you can't have one arm of our federal government, law enforcement, the DOJ and the FBI, using their power based entirely on a hit piece done on Donald Trump by his political opponent, paid for by the opposing political party, and then use that to get warrants and spy on the Trump team, really, truly cook up out of whole cloth, out of nothing, the entire Trump-Russia collusion. We all had to watch it. And now we're at the point of how strongly, how firmly are we going to insist on both prosecutions of wrongdoers and also a redoing of the law, the FISA law that Congress could redo, could redefine, reshape in order to make the FISA court more accountable. That's an ongoing dispute in Washington. I guess we're not going to get Hans back. That's okay. Last thing is he's been on, and we'll save it for another day, which is the Electoral College, and we are getting close. This NPV, National Popular Vote, NPV, National Popular Vote, is the effort of leftists to destroy the Electoral College and to have the next election, 2020, be a flat-out popular vote. Many reasons why this is truly undermining of our country, of our entire system of government. It was written into the Constitution. The Electoral College is written in for very specific reasons by our founders to prevent having basically the 2 or 3 most populous cities or states choosing the president and the whole rest of the country with no say. That was why the Electoral College was put in place. We'll have to get back with Hans another time on that topic, but love having him on. And that, I guess, we're done with him for today.